Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivedanta. Wow. Last couple of days, it's this extravaganza. Krishna's appearance day celebration, and then Prabhupada's appearance day celebration. Wow. Hey, Hare Krishna. Wow. I just watched everything on YouTube. Like the temple's across the street, you know. But I was just watching. You actually get a better view of everything with the cameras than when you're there. Hare Krishna. What an extravaganza. Oh my. Hare Krishna. Actually, the temple authorities, they asked people to please stay home and watch everything on YouTube. There were a couple people, a couple of the devotees at the temple have now come down with the virus. One of the ladies, like my age, so hope she's going to be all right. And then somebody else also. So the virus is starting to appear over there. So she was asking everyone to please stay home. And now that the festivals are over, they're going to close the temple completely for 1 whole month. Nobody is going to come in there. Just the people, you know, the skeleton crew, so to speak, that maintains everything is going to be there. No guests, no visitors, no devotees from Mongol Arctic, nothing. It closed down, shut down for 1 week in an effort to see if the virus has got a foothold there because of all the guests that were coming and going. And now they've got these 2 cases, 2 devotees came down with it. So they just closed everything down. So I just watched everything on YouTube. It was great. It's like, you can't beat it, you know. They've got the cameras going on everything. You can hear everything, see everything. Yeah, it's like really nice. Hare Krishna. And then the offerings to Srila Prabhupada by the different disciples and grand disciples this morning. Watched that. And it was really inspiring. The devotees are doing they're all like Hanumans, you know. Hanuman lifting the mountain peak to help build the bridge to Lanka, you know. I mean, they're moving mountains, these people, you know. Like 5,000 books went out since the beginning of the year, and then they're selling full sets of this and full sets of that, and Krishna, they have that energy, you know. Prabhupada said, if you have that energy, use it, and then later when you don't have it, like me, I don't have that energy anymore. You won't regret it, you know. You can just, you're free to chant and hear. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I almost signed up to they did a Zoom where the devotees went on and they gave their Vyas Puja offerings. And I went to the page, the temple page, where the form is to sign up. And then I got cold feet. I'm not a heavy hitter like these people. The only thing I could say is, I would be able to say is, I've just renewed my vows, you know. I mean, come on, anyway. They're reporting to Prabhupada all these, everything, and glorifying. And, you know, I'd be saying, I'm back to chanting my 16 rounds. And following 4 principles. Yeah, no. So I didn't know. It's going to go on again tonight at 6 o'clock because they ran out of time. And more devotees are going to go on and give their glorifications of Prabhupada. What I was going to do is, someone gave me this as a gift. It's looks like a 5-volume set. Yeah, 6 volumes. How many books are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-volume set of the biography of Srila Prabhupada, his activities. There's that was a nice gift. It's like the official ISKCON biography of Srila Prabhupada. his pastime, his life, his activities. So I thought maybe I would read from that a little bit. I might make that a regular thing. I don't know. I haven't read from it yet. It still has the plastic on it. I haven't. This is an unboxing here. I haven't even taken the plastic off the first volume. So see how it goes. Yeah. And I have a couple more mantras to finish. Wait, where did they go? Oh, a couple more mantras. And 4th day in a row, 16 rounds. Somebody give me a medal. I found a way to, I think it's going to help to stay focused. After each round, I read a verse and a purport. Because the mind wanders, you know. You chant Hare Krishna, 4 hours, Hare Krishna, the mind's all over the place. So after each round, read a verse. And then at least the mind has something, Krishna conscious, to mull over before it starts to wander again. And by then, it's time you finish the round. And then you read another verse. So I'm going to be doing that. I think that's going to help. Plus, I'll get to do more reading of the books. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, like for instance, the verse I just read when I finished the last round, the 15th round, was the Lord Brahma was speaking to his son Narada, and Narada spoke to Vyasadeva, and in the purport, Prabhupada explained the qualities of Srila Vyasadeva and what it was Narada actually asked him to do. Narada asked him to describe the activities of the personality of Godhead. So, starting the 16th round, I've got that floating around in there. Okay, you know, Brahma's in there, Narada's in there, Vyasadeva, the pastimes, it's all in there. And then I'm not thinking about, you know, what so-and-so said to me the other day that I didn't like. You know, it's you know, it's irrelevant. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, or how the floor needs painting, or, you know, you're not thinking about that stuff. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna. And then Prabhupada, he's the foremost representative of Srila Vyasadeva. So Brahma, Narada, Vyas, and then there's a bunch of others in there, and then Prabhupada. Hare Brahma heard from Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. I was thinking, there's 4 sampradayas. There's the Brahma sampradaya, there's the Lakshmi sampradaya, there's the Shiva sampradaya, and there's a sampradaya for the Kumaras, who are also sons of Lord Brahma. Now, I was thinking of all the sampradayas, I don't know, maybe I'm prejudiced. I was thinking that this Brahma sampradaya seems to me to be the topmost. Because Brahma is the creator of this universe, and we're stuck in it. And he's actually engineered all the different life forms that are made out of the Lord's material energies, the elements and his energies. He's creator. So it seems like when he gets a message from Krishna, it's going to be the most significant for us because we're the creatures that were created, at least our bodies. Anyway, it just seemed really significant to me, but and then it is the most active right now. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama. So from Lord Brahma we get the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Brahma Samhita, we get Narada, Vyas, and the whole line of disciplic succession in the Bhagavatams. especially Bhagavad Gita. We get that. But then with the appearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you get the Maha Mantra, which is the devotee who has this intimate, loving relationship with the Lord in the mood of conjugal love, calling out for the Lord in separation. And that's what the mantra is. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. So you put those things together, you get the Bhagavatam and the Holy Cyclic Succession, and then you've got Lord Chaitanya, and it's coming from his lips. The mantra is coming directly from the Lord's lips. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama. This is powerful stuff, you know. I mean, they're going crazy over there at the temple. I mean, it's like they're all Hanumans over there, lifting these mountain peaks. One devotee cooked 100 preparations yesterday, and then today prepared 64 more for Prabhupada. Hare Krishna, you're chanting for 4 hours straight without an interruption. There was a tent set up outside, and they were chanting 4 hours straight. I think they're still chanting over there. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. You know, it's like when a child, or anybody really, but especially children, when they're learning to play a musical instrument, they do the etudes, you know, the scales. I think they call it etudes. Da 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 da. Da, 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 to learn the fingerings and how to breathe through the instrument, whether it's a flute or like a clarinet or a trumpet or whatever it is. They're learning how to. So sometimes chanting Hare Krishna, at least seems like that to me, you know. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Sometimes, like, I don't know if they still do it, but when I was little and I was in school, sometimes if someone had, one of the children, I think I might have had to do it a couple times for different reasons, misbehaved, they had to write 100 times, like, I will not talk out of turn. 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 I will raise my hand. I will raise my hand. I will raise my hand. I remember that sometimes, I think I had to do that. I think it was talk out of turn or something. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I will remember Krishna. I will chant Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna! Krishna. Okay, so this is Volume 1. And it's the years 1896 to 1965. And how can we get this open? It's shrink wrapped, untouched by human hands until now. It's open here. Okay. Almost. Okay. Krishna. Shri Krishna, Chaitanya, Guru Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasi, or Bhaktivedanta. Okay, so Volume 1, a biography of His Divine Grace by Satsvarupa, that's Goswami. Satsvarupa served Prabhupada as his personal secretary and traveled with him extensively for a number of years. And I remember when he was compiling this biography, he was living at Gitanagari in a little cabin, and he was interviewing, so many people, devotees and others who had some association with Prabhupada when he was putting it all together. But he's retired now. He took disciples for a while, and he's not taking disciples now. And he's retired. I think he's living in Ireland. And I don't know exactly what he's doing. I'm sure he's just going deeper and deeper into Krishna consciousness, hearing and chanting. He may be doing some writing, I don't know. But he's not very public. His life is a little private right now. So this was 2,000 copies, then 8,000 copies, then 5,000 copies. 1980. So there's a total of 15,000 copies in print. And the table of contents: Prabhupada's childhood, his college, marriage, and his involvement in Gandhi's movement, and a title called A Very Nice Saintly Person. That must be about Bhaktivedanta. And then the chapter, How Shall I Serve You? And then The War, An Unknown Friend, Jhansi, The League of Devotees, New Delhi, Crying Alone in the Wilderness. Then A Resident of Vrindavan, This Momentous Hour of Need, and The Dream Come True. And there's some appendices: Significant Events of Prabhupada's Life, and then a section of Prabhupada's writings in India from 1936 to 1965. And this is the author's foreword. Oh no, this is from a professor. I might as well do the whole thing, you know. This is from Professor Harvey Cox, Harvard University. He says, "It is a distinct and unusual honor for me to be asked to write a foreword to this eloquent and informative biography of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. To my great regret, I never met him during his sojourn here in America, but I feel that I have met him. The spiritual reality of a great teacher lives on in many ways, not the least in the lives of those he has touched. Since I have come to know many of Srila Prabhupada's disciples over the past years, as well as many devotees who were influenced by him without knowing him personally, I sense a certain acquaintanceship. To write this forward seems then in some measure like introducing a friend. Although it is not true to say in all cases that a religious movement is the shadow of a great teacher, still there is some measure of truth even in that familiar statement. It will surely help readers of this book understand ISKCON better, to know the man who founded it, and to be aware of the soil from which he comes. The patience and care with which the author of this volume has reconstructed the long life of Srila Prabhupada had already lived even before he set forth for America, makes for absorbing and inspiring reading. I read it, I confess, not just because of my own interest in Srila Prabhupada, but because the Melu the author recreates tells us so much more than a mere life story could. It reminds us of how very ensconced Srila Prabhupada was in one of the oldest religious traditions in the world. It recalls how very much went on in the generations, centuries, and even millennia before him that seems to be gathered and focused in his life and in his teachings. In one sense, Srila Prabhupada was not at all original. And reading the story of his life raises questions about our typical Western proclivity to attach such value to originality. What the book makes clear, on the contrary, is that Srila Prabhupada is a man who incarnates an ancient tradition. The opening verses of the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Indian text most precious to ISKCON, teach that the ageless science of Bhakti Yoga, what Christians might call the devotional path to God, is always received by what the Indians call parampara. That is, it is passed from one teacher to the next in a living chain, from ancient times to the present. Srila Prabhupada is best understood as this book presents him as one particularly effective link in this chain. Yet, it must be added, Srila Prabhupada was also a unique person. To say that the teachings of the ancient ones come to us through a series of teachers does not mean that the teachers themselves are interchangeable. If they were so faceless, there would be little point in writing a biography of any of them. But this life of Srila Prabhupada is pointed proof that one can be a transmitter of truth and still be a vital and singular person, even in a sense I now feel safe to use, in some ways, original. Srila Prabhupada lived during a particularly critical period in Indian history, that of British colonial rule and its aftermath. He worked with and among dozens of people who befriended, opposed, supported, or ignored him. He initiated Back to Godhead magazine. At what almost anyone would consider a very advanced age, when most people would be resting on their laurels, he hearkened to the mandate of his own spiritual teacher and set out on the difficult and demanding voyage to America. Srila Prabhupada is, of course, only one of thousands of teachers, but in another sense, he is one in 1,000, maybe one in 1,000,000. As a Christian, it is very important and impressive to me that Srila Prabhupada took it upon himself to bring the teaching he so well represents to America. This sentence, I am sure, requires some explanation. First of all, as a Christian, I come from a tradition in which God's sending of someone to bring a vital message to those who desperately need it is held in very high esteem. Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, Yahweh sends prophets to remind the people how far they have strayed from his will, to expose the way they have misused the poor and failed to defend the widow and the fatherless. In the New Testament, Jesus sets forth his disciples 2 by 2, asking them to take along only the scantiest clothing and equipment, telling them to bear the message of peace and salvation to the uttermost parts of the earth. God himself is depicted as sending his only Son into the world on a mission that would ultimately cost him his life. Christians are taught to respect and admire those who are willing to pay the heavy price of leaving comfort and security behind to go somewhere else to carry a message of liberation. Today, however, many Christians have become comfortable and complacent, not only unwilling themselves to engage in such hardship, but often unable to even understand or appreciate those who do. It is a great loss. Even though some people claim it is a good thing that many Christians are no longer interested in carrying their message to the other parts of the world, that they have become less presumptuous or arrogant, I personally believe it has more to do with sloth and the satiety of consumer society than with humility. I have little patience with zealous proselytizing, no matter who inflicts it on whom. I do believe, however, that any spiritual teacher worth following is also worth sharing. When I visited India, living, in fact, in the very place where Srila Prabhupada's tradition is centered, Vrindavan, I was thankfully received by everyone there, including the sages and holy men, and was asked to share my tradition with them. I spoke to them as a Christian about what Jesus Christ means to me and about what his teaching has to offer to the world. They listened attentively and gratefully. Their only complaint, as I recall, was that I had not spoken long enough. Indians, unlike Americans, seem in no hurry to rush off to something else if there was a serious spiritual discussion to be followed. Given the fact that I was so well received in Srila Prabhupada's own land, I am sorry that he and his students still often find it so difficult to be heard or be taken seriously here in America. I am grateful for this book for 2 additional reasons that its writer could not have known. First, the author uses, among other methods, the growingly important method we call, in the West, oral history. He incorporates the fruits of many interviews with the people who knew Srila Prabhupada or who encountered him, who contribute some little bit of information, however tiny or fleeting, to make up the whole picture. In a few years, all these people will have passed on. Those sources will be lost, at least to our mortal ears, forever. It is extremely important that the writer use this method and used it so very skillfully. I hope others will use it as effectively. Also, perhaps without fully intending to, the author is giving us a portrait of an age, the apex and the nadir of the passing epoch of which might be called Western dominance. He shows us the devastation wreaked by cultural imperialism and demonstrates how stubbornly its destructive residues remain in the mental habits and even in the eating patterns of a previously colonized people long after the actual political rule of the outsider has been thrown off. Especially since this volume covers that period of Srila Prabhupada's life before he came to America, it is vital to see that he was also instrumental in leading a revival of traditional Indian cultural and spiritual values in India itself before he came to our shores. Since that self-same phenomena is now underway wherever the long arm of European dominance once reached, the book can also be read as an integral part of the growing literature of Third World cultural renaissance. Obviously, this volume can be appreciated in many ways. It can also be read, I should add, as the very fascinating story of a very fascinating man. In any case, however, the present reader wishes to approach it, I am glad now to terminate this forward and allow him or her to get on with the joy of reading. Harvey Cox, Professor of Divinity, Harvard University. Hare Krishna. And this is the preface by the author Satsvarupa. It's a short preface. After the disappearance of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada from this mortal world on November 14, 1977, many of his disciples saw a need for an authorized biography of Srila Prabhupada. The responsibility of commissioning such a work rested with the governing body commission of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. At their annual meeting in 1978, the GBC resolved that a biography of Srila Prabhupada should be written, and that I would be the author. I love chanting with you. Yeah, well, maybe we can go online and chant. Hare Krishna. According to the Vaishnava tradition, if one aspires to write transcendental literature, he must first take permission from his spiritual master and Krishna. A good example of this is Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, the author of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's authorized biography, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. As Krishnadas Kaviraj has explained, quote, in Vrindavan there were also many other great devotees, all of whom desired to hear the last pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. By their mercy, all these devotees ordered me to write of the last pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Because of their order only, although I am shameless, I have attempted to write this Chaitanya Charitamrita, having received the order of the Vaishnavas, but being anxious within my heart, I went back to the temple of Madan Mohan in Vrindavan to ask his permission also. End quote. So Satsvarupa continues. He says, this transcendental process is further described by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, in his commentary on the Chaitanya Charitamrita as follows. Quote, this is Prabhupada, to write about the transcendental pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not an ordinary endeavor. Unless one is empowered by the higher authorities or advanced devotees, one cannot write transcendental literature, for all such literature must be above suspicion, or in other words, it must have none of the defects of conditioned souls, namely mistakes, illusion, cheating, and imperfect sense perception. The words of Krishna and the disciplic succession that carries the orders of Krishna are actually authoritative. One must first become a pure devotee, following the strict regulative principles and chanting 16 rounds daily. I'm going to read that again. Hare Krishna. One must first become a pure devotee following strict regulative principles, chanting 16 rounds daily. And strict regulative principles. And when one thinks he is actually on the Vaishnava platform, he must then take permission from the spiritual master. And that permission must also be confirmed by Krishna from within his heart. Hey Jocelyn, Hare Krishna, Haribo. We're reading from a biography of Srila Prabhupada. And these are the years before he came to America, 1890 something, 1896 to 1965. This is the introduction part here, the preface. To say that, and now this is Satsvarupa continuing, he's the author, Satsvarupa, and he's explaining how he's commissioned to write this. It's not an ordinary thing to write something like this. But, okay, so to say that the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta is an authorized biography does not mean that it is a flattering portrait commissioned by an official body, but that it is an authorized literature presented by one who is serving the order of Krishna and Guru through disciplic succession. As such, Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta is not written from the mundane or speculative viewpoint, nor can ordinary biographers comprehend the significance and the meaning of the life of a pure devotee of God. Were such persons to objectively study the life of Srila Prabhupada, the esoteric meanings would evade them. Were they charitably try to praise Srila Prabhupada, they would not know how. But because Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta is authorized through the transcendental process, it can transparently present the careful reader with a true picture of Srila Prabhupada. Another important aspect of the authenticity of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta is the vast amount of carefully researched information that I am able to focus into each volume. The leading devotees of the Krishna consciousness movement, in addition to giving me permission to render this work, have also invited the world community of ISKCON devotees to help me in gathering detailed information about the life and person of Srila Prabhupada. The Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, Prabhupada's publishing house, has given me his collection of letters, totaling over 7,000. And scores of Prabhupada's disciples have granted interviews and submitted diaries and memoirs of their association with Srila Prabhupada. Aside from his disciples, we have interviewed many persons in various walks of life who met Srila Prabhupada over the years. The result is that we have a rich, composite view of Srila Prabhupada drawn from many persons who knew him in many different situations and stages of his life. The acknowledgments section in this book lists the persons who are cooperating to bring about Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta. Despite the authorized nature of this book, and despite the support of my many well-wishers, I must confess that in attempting to describe the glories of our spiritual master, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, I am like a small bird trying to empty the ocean by carrying drops of water to the land. The picture I've given of Srila Prabhupada is only a glimpse into His unlimited mercy. And that glimpse has only been possible by the grace of Guru and Krishna. Signed, Satsvarupa Das Goswami. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. And there's a lot of pictures here. Hare Rama. Okay, so now we have an introduction. Hare Krishna. Fairly short. This is also by the author Satsvarupa Das Goswami. So this is an introduction. It looks like it's an introduction to this particular volume. And he says, this volume begins in Calcutta in 1896 with the birth of Abhay Charan Day and ends in 1965 with Abhay Charanaravindra Bhaktivedanta Swami on his way to New York City aboard the steamship Jaladuta. So there's an asterisk next to Bhaktivedanta Swami, and the asterisk says, Charanaravindra was the name Abhay Charana Day, spiritual master gave him at his initiation. Charanaravindra was given to him by Bhaktisiddhanta. And then it continues, Bhaktivedanta was a title his godbrothers conferred upon him in recognition of his devotional and scholarly qualities. And the title came in 1959 when the title Swami came in 1959 when he entered the renounced order. So, Abhay Charanaravindra Bhaktivedanta Swami. That's how he got all those titles. Charanaravindra was given to him an initiation by Bhaktisiddhanta. Bhaktivedanta was given to him by his godbrothers because of his scholarly abilities. And Swami was when he took renounced order, became a sannyas in 1959. He was born, his name when he was born in 1896 was Abhay Charanar Day. Abhay Charan Day. Okay. The worldwide fame of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, later known as Srila Prabhupada, was to come after 1965, after he arrived in America. Before leaving India, he had written 3 books. In the next 12 years, he was to write 60. Before he left India, he had initiated 1 disciple. In the next 12 years, he would initiate more than 4,000. Before he left India, hardly anyone had believed that he could fulfill his vision of a worldwide society of Krishna devotees. But in the next decade, he would form and maintain the International Society for Krishna Consciousness and open more than 100 centers. Before sailing for America, he had never been outside India. But in the next 12 years, he would travel many times around the world, propagating the Krishna consciousness movement. It had been predicted in the scriptures and envisioned by great saints. A few of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers had even tried to make it happen. They had gone to England, only to return convinced that it was impossible. But not until Srila Prabhupada traveled to America did it come to pass that Westerners wholeheartedly took up the life of Vaishnavism and became Krishna conscious devotees. This story of Srila Prabhupada's spiritual success is narrated in subsequent volumes of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta, which roughly translates as the nectar of the pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. So in later volumes, that will be described. He says, beginning with volume 2, Planting the Seed, New York City, 1965-1966. This present volume, which covers most of his lifetime, telling how he prepared himself for his late burst of revolutionary spiritual activity, is most important. These first 69 years form a complete, dramatic life story and do not depend on anything he did later to explain them. Abhay Charan's father, Gaur Mohan De, carefully prepared Abhay from childhood for the life of a pure Vaishnava. Gaur Mohan taught him to worship Krishna and encouraged him, beginning when Abhay was only 5, in his Lord Jagannath cart parade throughout the streets of their Calcutta neighborhood. A small Rath Yatra festival, the same festival Abhay was later to enact on a magnificent scale in many Western cities. Srila Prabhupada used to say in his later days that whatever principles he had established as leader of the Hare Krishna movement, he had learned in his childhood, with but one important exception: book publication and distribution, which he had learned later from his spiritual master. It was his first meeting with his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, in 1922, that focused Srila Prabhupada's future life into a meditation on how to carry out the mission of preaching Krishna consciousness in the West. After that first meeting, his entire life, his writings, his taking sannyas, his publishing books, and finally going to the West, became part of his dedication to carrying out the order of this higher authority. Srila Prabhupada's obligation to his wife and children and his attempts to develop a business career in the pharmaceutical industry may appear inconsistent with a single-minded determination to spread Krishna consciousness. Yet, his earnestness in pursuing these responsibilities and the way Providence finally extricated him from them prove important in his essential life of preparation. After he left his family responsibilities in 1950, he met with obstacles of obscurity, poverty, and an insecurity imposed by the tumultuous times in which he lived. But again, his struggle to continue his mission was part of his preparation. In the light of Srila Prabhupada's unprecedented spiritual achievements in his later life, it seems inevitable that I should say something here about his being empowered by God. According to the Vedic scriptures, the lives of certain individuals are part of God's mission on earth. In the West, Jesus Christ is the best known example, a chosen son sent by God from the spiritual world. And in the East, the Vedic writings tell of various avatars of Lord Vishnu, incarnations of the Supreme Lord with specific names, characteristics, and activities. Thus, Lord Krishna sometimes appears himself, and he sometimes empowers a particular devotee to do his work. Srila Prabhupada, in his commentary on Chaitanya Charitamrita, explains about souls empowered by Lord Krishna. So this is the quote. This is Prabhupada explaining. There are two kinds of living entities, Nityasiddha and Nityabhada. The Nityasiddha never forgets his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whereas the Nityabhada is always conditioned even before the creation. He always forgets his relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By the order of the Supreme, the Nityasiddha remains within the material world like an ordinary man, but his only business is to broadcast the glories of the Lord. All Nityasiddhas within this material world may appear to toil like ordinary men, but they never forget their position as servants of the Lord. End quote. Satsvarupa continues, in determining whether a person is empowered by God, the main consideration is the quality of his work. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, the scholar Vallabha says to Lord Chaitanya, quote, the fact that you have spread Krishna consciousness all over the world proves that you have Krishna Shakti, transcendental power from Lord Krishna. End quote. After Srila Prabhupada's passing away in 1977, his senior godbrother, B.R. Sridhar Maharaj, quoted the same Krishna Shakti verse and applied it to Srila Prabhupada. Unless he had been empowered by Krishna, he could not have spread Krishna consciousness as he did. When we consider Srila Prabhupada's identity as Lord Krishna's empowered representative, the years of struggle described in this volume take on a special sweetness. These years reveal little-known events in the life of a person who was always wrapped in devotional remembrance of Krishna. Although he struggled through many hardships, his struggles were not those of an ordinary man, for he lived solely to carry out the will of Guru and Krishna. I invite the reader to enjoy the very real human life story of Srila Prabhupada, who is known in this volume as Abhay Charan. Krishna Jai. This is very nicely written, isn't it? This is not too bad. It's really nice. Hare Krishna. I guess maybe just read, well, I don't know. It's hard to stop, you know. Should I keep going? I don't know. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Well, yeah, that's what today is, right? Hare Krishna. All right. But Prabhupada's childhood. He's just a little boy here. It's a little quote here in the beginning, chapter 1, his childhood. So a little quote says, we would be sleeping, and Father would be doing arti. Ding, ding, ding. We would hear the bell and wake up and see him bowing down before Krishna. That's Prabhupada. He had a sister. She looks like him. His sister. So they would be sleeping. Okay. It was Janmashtami, the annual celebration of the advent of Lord Krishna some 5,000 years ago. Residents of Calcutta, mostly Bengalis and other Indians, but also many Muslims and even some British, were observing the festive day, moving here and there through the city streets to visit the temples of Lord Krishna. Devout Vaishnavas, fasting until midnight, chanted Hare Krishna and heard about the birth and activities of Lord Krishna from Srimad Bhagavatam. They continued fasting, chanting, and worshipping throughout the night. The next day, September 1st, 1896, in a little house in Taligang suburb of Calcutta, a male child was born. Since he was born on Nandotsava, the day Krishna's father, Nanda Maharaj, had observed a festival in honor of Krishna's birth, the boy's uncle called him Nandulal. But his father, Gormohan Dey, and his mother, Rajani, named him Abhay Charan, one who is fearless, having taken shelter at the Lord's lotus feet. So that's what Abhay Charan means, one who is fearless, having taken shelter at Lord Krishna's lotus feet. In accordance with Bengali tradition, the mother had gone to the home of her parents for the delivery. And so it was on the bank of the Adi Ganga, a few miles from his father's home, in a small two-room, mud-walled house with a tiled roof, underneath a jackfruit tree, Abhay Charan was born. A few days later, Abhay returned with his parents to their home at 151 Harrison Road. An astrologer did a horoscope for the child, and the family was made jubilant by the auspicious reading. the astrologer made a specific prediction. He said, when this child reaches the age of 70, he would cross the ocean This is hard to read. This is a little hard to read. It's like, the hair standing on end, the voice choking up thing. I'll try. When this child reaches the age of 70, he will cross the ocean, become a great exponent of religion, and open 108 temples. That's history. That actually happened. Astrologer made that prediction. Abhaycharan was born into an India dominated by Victorian imperialism. Calcutta was the capital of India, the seat of the Viceroy, the Earl of Elgin and Kincharding, and the second city of the British Empire. Europeans and Indians lived separately, although in business and education they intermingled. The British lived mostly in central Calcutta amidst their own theaters, racetracks, cricket fields, and fine European buildings. The Indians lived more in North Calcutta. Here the men dressed in dhotis and the women in saris, and while remaining loyal to the British Crown, followed their traditional religion and culture. Abhai's home at 151 Harrison Road was in the Indian section of North Calcutta. Abhai's father, Gaur De, was a cloth merchant of moderate income and belonged to the aristocratic Suvarnavanic merchant community. He was related, however, to the wealthy Mullik family, which for hundreds of years had traded in gold and salt with the British. Originally, the Mulliks had been members of the Dey family, a Gotra lineage that traces back to the ancient sage Gautama. But during the Mughal period of pre-British India, a Muslim ruler had conferred the title Mullik on a wealthy, influential branch of the Deys. Then, several generations later, a daughter of the Deys had married into the Mullik family, and the two families had remained close ever since. An entire block of properties on either side of Harrison Road belonged to Lokanath Mullik, and Gaur Mohan and his family lived in a few rooms of a 3-story building within the Mullik properties. Across the street from the Dey's residence was a Radhakovinda Temple, where for the past 150 years the Mulliks had maintained worship of the deity of Radha and Krishna. Various shops on the Mullik properties provided income for the deity and for the priests conducting the worship. Every morning before breakfast, the Mullik family members would visit the temple to see the deity of Radha Govinda. They would offer cooked rice, kachoris, and vegetables on a large platter, and would then distribute prasad to the deity's morning visitors from the neighborhood. Among daily visitors was Abhaycharan, accompanying his mother, father, or servant. So Srila Prabhupada says here, I used to ride on the same perambulator with Siddheshwar Mullik. That's like a baby carriage, perambulator. He used to call me Moti, Pearl, and his nickname was Subidi. And the servant pushed us together. If one day this friend did not see me, he would become mad. He would not go in the baby carriage, perambulator, without me. He would not separate even for a moment. As the servant pushed the baby carriage into the wide expanse of Harrison Road, timing his crossing between the bicycles and horse-drawn hackneys, the two children in the pram gazed up at the fair sky and tall trees across the road. Sounds and sights of the hackneys and their large wheels spinning over the road caught the fascinated attention of the two children. The servant steered the carriage towards the arched gateway within the red sandstone wall bordering the Radhakovinda Mandir, and as Abai and his friend rode underneath the ornate metal arch and into the courtyard, they saw high above them 2 stone lions, the heralds and protectors of the temple compound, their right paws extended. In the courtyard was a circle drive, and on the oval lawn were lampposts with gas lights, and a statue of a young woman in robes. Sharply chirping sparrows flitted in the shrubs and trees, or hopped across the grass, pausing to peck the ground, while choruses of pigeons cooed, sometimes abruptly flapping their wings overhead, sailing off to another perch, or descending to the courtyard. Voices chattered as Bengalis moved to and fro, dressed in simple cotton saris and white dhotis. Someone paused by the carriage to amuse the golden-skinned boys with their shining dark eyes, but mostly people were passing by quickly, going into the temple. The heavy double doors leading into the inner courtyard were open, and the servant eased the carriage wheels down a foot-deep step and proceeded through the foyer, then down another step and into the bright sunlight of the main courtyard. There they faced a stone statue of Garuda, perched on a 4-foot column. This carrier of Vishnu, Garuda, half man and half bird, kneeled on one knee, his hands folded prayerfully, his eagle's beak strong, and his wings poised behind him. The carriage moved ahead past 2 servants sweeping and washing the stone courtyard. It was just a few paces across the courtyard to the temple. So every day, Prabhupada was taken to this temple for darshan. He was doing this every day. The temple area itself, open like a pavilion, was a raised platform with a stone roof supported by stout pillars 15 feet tall. At the left end of the temple pavilion stood a crowd of worshippers, viewing the deities on the altar. The servant pushed the carriage closer, lifting the 2 boys out, then holding their hands, escorted them reverentially before the deities. Now Srila Prabhupada says, I can remember standing at the doorway of Radhakovinda Temple saying prayers to Radhakovinda Murti. I would watch for hours together. The deity was so beautiful with his slanted eyes. The Satsvarupa continues, Radha and Govinda, freshly bathed and dressed, now stood on their silver throne amidst vases of fragrant flowers. Govinda was about 18 inches high, and Radharani, standing to his left, was slightly smaller. Both were golden. Radha and Govinda both stood in the same graceful, curved, dancing pose, right leg bent at the knee, and right foot placed in front of the left. Radharani, dressed in a lustrous silk sari, held her reddish right palm in benediction. Sometimes Radha, her hand is extended, her right palm. Sometimes it's just extended to Krishna. She's offering a tulsi leaf or a manjari or a flower or something to Krishna. These are the deity forms. And sometimes the deity is offering benediction to those others. So this particular deity, she's offering benediction. Her hand is like this. Radharani, dressed in a lustrous silk sari, held up her reddish right palm in benediction. And Krishna, in his silk jacket and dhoti, played on a golden flute. At Govinda's lotus feet were green tulsi leaves with pulp of sandalwood. Hanging around their lordships' necks and reaching down almost to their lotus feet were several garlands of fragrant night-blooming jasmines, delicate trumpet-like blooms resting lightly on Radha and Govinda's divine forms. Their necklaces of gold, pearls, and diamonds shimmered. Radharani's bracelets were of gold, and both she and Krishna wore gold-embroidered silk chatters around their shoulders. As a shawl, a chatter. The flowers in their hands and their hair were small and delicate, and the silver crowns on their heads were bedecked with jewels. Radha and Krishna were slightly smiling. beautifully dressed, dancing on their silver throne beneath a silver canopy and surrounded by flowers. To Abai, they appeared most attractive. Life outside on Harrison Road and beyond was forgotten. In the courtyard, the birds went on chirping, and visitors came and went, but Abai stood silently, absorbed in seeing the beautiful forms of Krishna, Radharani, Supreme Lord, and his eternal consort. He's just a little boy. He's just got out of the baby carriage, and he's absorbed. Then the kirtan began, devotees chanting and playing on drums and kartals. Abai and his friend kept watching as the pujaris offered incense, its curling smoke hanging in the air, then a flaming lamp, a conch shell, a handkerchief, flowers, a whisk, and a peacock fan. Finally, the pujari blew the conch shell loudly, and the arti ceremony was over. So this is another little section here. When Abai was 1.5 years old, he fell ill with typhoid. The family physician, Dr. Bose, prescribed chicken broth, chicken soup. No, Gormohan protested. I cannot allow it. The doctor, otherwise he will die. He has to eat chicken soup. He'll die. Prabhupada's father, and Prabhupada's 1.5 years old. But we're not meat eaters, Gormohan pleaded. We cannot prepare chicken in our kitchen. Don't mind, Dr. Bose said. I shall prepare it in my house and bring it in a jar. And you simply... Gormohan assented. If it's necessary for my son to live. So the doctor came with his chicken soup and offered it to Abai, who immediately began to vomit. The doctor's trying to give him this chicken soup and he's throwing up all over the place. All right, the doctor admitted. Never mind. This is no good. Gormohan then threw the chicken broth away, and Abai gradually recovered from the typhoid without having to eat meat. Another little excerpt here. On the roof of Abai's maternal grandmother's house was a little garden with flowers, greenery, and trees. Along with other grandchildren, 2-year-old Abai took pleasure in watering the plants with a sprinkling can. But his particular tendency was to sit alone amongst the plants. He would find a nice bush and make a sitting place. One day when Abai was 3, he narrowly escaped a fatal burning. He was playing with matches in front of his house when he caught his clothes on fire. Suddenly, a man appeared and put the fire out. Abai was saved, although he retained a small scar on his leg. In 1900, when Abai was 4, a vehement plague hit Calcutta. Dozens of people died every day, and thousands evacuated the city. That was in 1900. He was 4 years old. When there seemed no way to check the plague, an old Babaji organized Hare Krishna Sankirtan all over Calcutta. Regardless of religion, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and Parsi all joined, and a large party of chanters traveled from street to street, door to door, chanting the holy names Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The group arrived at Gormohan's house, 151 Harrison Road, and Gormohan eagerly received them. Although Abai was a little child, his head reaching only up to the knees of the chanters, he also joined in the chanting. Shortly after this, the plague subsided. Gormohan, Prabhupada's father, was a pure Vaishnava, and he raised his son to be Krishna conscious. Since his own parents had also been Vaishnavas, Gormohan had never touched meat, fish, eggs, tea, or coffee. His complexion was fair, and his disposition reserved. At night he would lock up his cloth shop, and set a bowl of rice in the middle of the floor to satisfy the rats, so they would not chew the cloth in their hunger and return home. Hare Krishna. There he would read from Chaitanya Charitamrita and Srimad Bhagavatam, the main scriptures of Bengali Vaishnavas, chant on his japa beads, and worship the deity of Lord Krishna. He was gentle and affectionate and would never punish a boy. Even when obliged to correct him, Gaur Mohan would first apologize. He would say, "You are my son, so now I must correct you. It's my duty." Even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's father would chastise him, so don't mind. Srila Prabhupada, he remembers, he says, "My father's income was no more than 250 rupees, but there was no question of need. In the mango season when we were children, we would run through the house playing, and we would grab mangoes as we were running through. And all through the day we would eat mangoes. We wouldn't have to think, 'Can I have a mango?' My father always provided food. Mangoes were 1 rupee a dozen. Life was simple, but there was always plenty. We were middle class, but receiving 4 or 5 guests daily. My father gave 4 daughters in marriage, and there was no difficulty for him." That's interesting. I met the one sister. I guess there were 3 more sisters. Wonder where they are, or what happened to them, or... Interesting. The one sister was also initiated by Bhaktivedanta, Pishima. She was initiated by Bhaktivedanta, and she would stay at Mayapur when Prabhupada was there. I don't know what happened to the other 3. But Prabhupada says, "My father gave 4 daughters in marriage, and there was no difficulty for him. Maybe it was not a very luxurious life, but there was no scarcity of food, or shelter, or cloth. Daily he purchased 2.5 kilograms of milk. He did not like to purchase retail, but would purchase a year's supply of coal by the cartload." We were happy. Not that because we did not purchase a motor car we were unhappy. My father used to say, "God has 10 hands. If he wants to take away from you with 2 hands, how much can you protest? And when he wants to give to you with 10 hands, then with your 2 hands, how much can you take?" My father would rise a little late, around 7 or 8. Then, after taking bath, he would go purchasing. Then, from 10 o'clock to 1 in the afternoon, he was engaged in puja. Then he would take his lunch and go to business. And in the business shop, he would take a little rest for 1 hour. He would come home from business at 10 o'clock at night, and then again he would do puja. Actually, his real business was puja. That's making the offerings. So he would get up at 7 or 8, and he would go shopping. Then from 10 to 1, he was worshiping. Then he would take his lunch. And then he'd go to his shop sometime in the afternoon. And then he would take rest for an hour. He would come home at night around 10, and then he would do puja. For livelihood, he did some business, but puja was his main business. We would be sleeping, and Father would be doing arti. Ding, ding, ding. We would hear the bell and wake up and see him bowing down before Krishna. Hare Krishna. So then Satsvarupa continues, it says, Gaur Mohan wanted Vaishnava goals for his son. He wanted Abai to become a servant of Radharani, to become a preacher of the Bhagavatam, and to learn the devotional art of playing mridanga. He regularly received sadhus in his home, and he would always ask them, "Please, bless my son, so that Srimati Radharani may be pleased with him, and grant him her blessings." Enjoying each other's company, father and son used to walk as far as 10 miles, saving the 5 paise tram fare. On the beach they used to see a yogi who, for years, had sat in one spot without moving. One day the yogi's son was sitting there, and people had gathered around. The son was taking over his father's sitting place. Gaur Mahan gave the yogis a donation and asked their blessings for his son. When Abai's mother said she wanted him to become a British lawyer when he grew up, which meant he would have to go to London to study, one of the Mullik uncles thought it was a good idea. But Gaur Mahan would not hear of it. If Abai went to England, he would be influenced by European dress and manners. He'll learn drinking and women hunting. Gaur Mahan objected. I do not want his money. From the beginning of Abai's life, Gaur Mahan had introduced his plan. He had hired a professional mridanga player to teach Abai the standard rhythms for accompanying kirtan. Rajani had been skeptical. What is the purpose of teaching such a young child to play the mridanga? It's not so important. But Gaur Mahan had his dream of a son who would grow up singing bhajans, playing mridanga, and speaking on Srimad Bhagavatam. When Abai sat to play the mridanga, even with his left and right arms extended as far as he could, his small hands would barely reach the drumheads at the opposite ends of the drum. With his right wrist, he would flick his hand just as his teacher instructed, and his fingers would make a high-pitched sound, teeny, 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 ta. Then he would strike the left drumhead with his open left hand, boom, boom. With practice and age, he was gradually learning the basic rhythms, and Gaur Mahan looked on with pleasure. Abai was an acknowledged pet child of both his parents. In addition to his childhood names, Moti, Nandulal, Nandu, and Kocha, his grandmother called him Kachori Mukhi because of his fondness for kachoris. It's a spicy, vegetable-stuffed fried pastry popular in Bengal. It's like a samosa, similar. Both his grandmother and mother would give him kachoris, which he kept in the many pockets of his little vest. He liked to watch the vendors cooking on the busy roadside and accept kachoris from them and from the neighbors until all the inside and outside pockets of his vest were filled. Hare Krishna. Jai. Yeah, Hare Krishna. Wow. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Sometimes when Abai demanded that his mother make him kachori, she would refuse. Once, she even sent him to bed. When Gaur Mahan came home and asked, "Where's Abai?" Rajani explained how he had been too demanding, and she had sent him to bed without kachoris. "No, we should make them for him," his father replied, and woke Abai and personally cooked puris and kachoris for him. Gaur Mahan was always lenient with Abai and careful to see that his son got whatever he wanted. When Gaur Mahan returned home at night, it was his practice to take a little puffed rice, and Abai would also sometimes sit with his father eating puffed rice. Once, at a cost of 6 rupees, Gaur Mahan bought Abai a pair of shoes, imported from England. And each year, through a friend who traveled back and forth from Kashmir, Gaur Mahan would present his son with a Kashmiri shawl with a fancy hand-sewn border. One day in the market, Abai saw a toy gun he wanted. His father said, "No," and Abai started to cry. All right, Gaur Mahan said. He bought the gun. Then Abai wanted another gun. "You already have one," his father said. "Why do you want another one?" "One for each hand." Abai cried. He lay down on the street, kicking his feet. When Gaur Mahan agreed to get the second gun, Abai was pacified. Abai's mother, Rajani, was 30 years old when he was born. Like her husband, she came from a long-established Gaudiya Vaishnava family. She was darker skinned than her husband, and whereas His disposition was cool, hers tended to be fiery. Abai saw his mother and father living together peacefully. No deep marital conflict or complicated dissatisfaction ever threatened home. Rajani was chaste and religious-minded, a model housewife in the traditional Vedic sense, dedicated to caring for her husband and children. But she was a little fiery. Abai observed his mother's simple and touching attempts to ensure by prayers, by vows, and even by rituals that he continued to live. Whenever he was to go out, even to play, his mother, after dressing him, would put a drop of saliva on her finger and touch it to his forehead. Abai never knew the significance of this act, but because she was his mother, he stood submissively, like a dog with its master. That's in quotes, but Prabhupada must have said, when he related this, because this is like quoting Prabhupada, it's like a dog with its master. He never knew the significance, but she was his mother, and he stood submissively, like a dog with its master, while she did it. Like Gormohan, Rajani treated Abai as the pet child. But where her husband expressed his love through leniency and plans for his son's spiritual success, she expressed hers through attempts to safeguard Abai from all danger, disease, and death. She once offered blood from her breast to one of the demigods with the supplication that Abai be protected on all sides from danger. At Abai's birth, she had made a vow to eat with her left hand until the day her son would notice and ask her why she was eating with the wrong hand. One day, when little Abai actually asked, she immediately stopped. It had just been another prescription for her survival, for she thought that by the strength of her vow, he would continue to grow, at least until he asked her about the vow. Had he not asked, she would never again have eaten with her right hand, and according to her superstition, he would have gone on living protected by her vow. For his protection, she also put an iron bangle around his leg. His playmates asked him what it was, and Abai self-consciously went to his mother and demanded, "Open this bangle." When she said, "I will do it later," he began to cry, "No, now!" Once Abai swallowed a watermelon seed, and his friends told him it would grow in his stomach into a watermelon. He ran to his mother, who assured him that he didn't have to worry. She would say a mantra to protect him. Now, Srila Prabhupada recounts something here. He says, Mother Yasoda would chant mantras in the morning to protect Krishna from all dangers throughout the day. When Krishna killed some demon, she thought it was due to her chanting. My mother would do a similar thing with me. Satsvarupa continues. His mother would often take him to the Ganges and personally bathe him. She also gave him a food supplement known as Horlicks. When he got dysentery, she cured it with hot puris and fried eggplant with salt, though sometimes when he was ill, Abai would show his obstinacy by refusing to take any medicine. Abai would show his obstinate taking any medicine, but just as he was stubborn, his mother was determined, and she would forcibly administer medicine into his mouth. Sometimes it took 3 assistants to hold him down. She would forcibly administer medicine into his mouth. He was stubborn and obstinate, but she was determined. It took 3 assistants to hold him down, to get the medicine in. So Srila Prabhupada remembers something here. He says, I was very naughty when I was a boy. I would break anything. When I was angry, I would break the glass hookah pipes, which my father kept to offer to guests. Once my mother was trying to bathe me, and I refused, and knocked my head on the ground. Blood came out. They came running and said, What are you doing? You shall kill the child. They thought his mother did that to him. It was him. He was angry. He was banging his head on the ground. Satsvarupa continues. Abai was present when his mother observed the ceremony of Sadahotra during the 7th and 9th months of her pregnancy. So she's pregnant with another child. Freshly bathed, she would appear in new clothing along with her children and enjoy a feast of whatever food she desired, while her husband gave goods in charity to the local Brahmins, who chanted mantras for the purification of the mother and the coming child. Hare Krishna. Abai was completely dependent on his mother. Sometimes she would put his shirt on backwards, and he would simply accept it without mentioning it. Although he was sometimes stubborn, he felt dependent on the guidance and reassurance of his mother. When he had to go to the privy, he would jump up and down beside her, holding her sari, saying, "Urine, mother, urine." "Who is stopping you?" she would ask. "Yes, you can go." Only then, with her permission, would he go. Sometimes, in the intimacy of dependence, his mother became his foil. When he lost a baby tooth, on her advice, placed it under a pillow that night, the tooth vanished and some money appeared. Abai gave the money to his mother for safekeeping, but later, when their constant association, she opposed him, he demanded, "I want my money back. I will go away from home. Now you give me my money back." When Rajani wanted her hair braided, she would regularly ask her daughters. But if Abai were present, she would insist on braiding it. He would insist on braiding it himself, and would create such a disturbance that they would give in to him. So her daughters are there, and they usually braided her hair. But if Abai was there, he wouldn't let them. He wanted to braid her hair. Once he painted the bottoms of his feet red, imitating the custom of women who paint their feet on festive occasions. His mother tried to dissuade him, saying it was not for children, but he insisted, "No, I must do it also." Abai was unwilling to go to school. "Why should I go?" he thought. "I will play all day." When his mother complained to Gaur Mohan, Abai, sure that his father would be affectionate, said, "No, I shall go tomorrow." So, "All right, he will go tomorrow," said Gaur Mohan. "That's all right." But next morning, Abai complained he was sick, and his father indulged him. Rajani became upset because the boy would not go to school. She hired a man for 4 rupees to escort him there. The man's name, who was Damodar, would tie Abai about the waist with a rope, a customary treatment, and take him to school, present him before his teacher. When Abai would try to run away, Damodar would pick him up, carrying him in his arms. After being taken a few times by force, Abai began to go on his own. Abai proved an attentive, well-behaved student, though sometimes he was very naughty. Once, when the teacher pulled his ear, Abai threw a kerosene lantern to the floor, accidentally starting a fire. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. This is Prabhupada. Wow. Hare Krishna. In those days, any common villager, even if illiterate, could recite from the Ramayana, Mahabharata, or Bhagavatam. Especially in the villages, everyone would assemble in the evening to hear from these scriptures. It was for this purpose that Abai's family would sometimes go in the evening to his maternal uncle's house, about 10 miles away, where they would assemble and hear about the Lord's transcendental pastimes. They would return home discussing and remembering them, and then go to bed and dream Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Bhagavatam. After his afternoon rest and bath, Abai would often go to a neighbor's house and look at the black and white pictures in Mahabharata. His grandmother asked him daily to read Mahabharata from a vernacular edition. Thus, by looking at pictures and reading with his grandmother, Abai imbibed Mahabharata. In Abai's childhood play, his younger sister, Baba Tarini, was often his assistant. Together they would go to see Radhakovinda deities in the Malik's temple. In their play, whenever they encountered obstacles, they would pray to God for help. Please, Krishna, help us fly this kite, they would call as they ran along trying to put their kite into flight. So this Baba Tarini is the sister. She's the younger sister. I'm thinking this may be when there was a description of when Abhai's mother was pregnant. I think this was the daughter, this Baba Tarini, and she also accepted initiation from Bhaktivedanta, Baba Tarini. Abhai's toys included 2 guns, a wind-up car, a cow that jumped when Abhai squeezed the rubber bulb attached, and a dog with a mechanism that made it dance. The toy dog was from Dr. Bose, the family physician, who gave it to him when treating a minor wound on Abhai's side. Abhai sometimes liked to pretend that he was a doctor, and to his friends he would administer medicine, which was nothing more than dust. I think this Dr. Bose later, when Abhai was working in a family to support of his own, he was working with this Dr. Bose. Abhai was enamored with the Rath Yatra festivals of Lord Jagannath held yearly in Calcutta. The biggest Calcutta Rath Yatra was the Mullaks, with 3 separate carts bearing the deities of Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra. Beginning from the Radhakovinda Temple, the carts would proceed down Harrison Road for a short distance and then return. The Mullaks would distribute large quantities of Lord Jagannath's prasadam to the public on this day. Actually, I think I'm going to stop here for a little while. And a little more than halfway through the childhood pastimes. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Yeah, maybe after a little while, take a little breather here and maybe read some more. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Wow. Krishna. And I get a little color here on this personality. It's Srila Prabhupada. A little background. Hare Krishna.